Hello friends, welcome back to the new tutorial. Today we are going to learn about the constructor versus ngOnInit in Angular. Those who haven't subscribed my channel yet, please do subscribe my channel, and if you like the video, please do like, share and comment on my video. Let's get started. So in Angular, both the constructor and the ngOnInit lifecycle hook are commonly used in the components, but they serve different purposes. Let's explore both of them in detail. Constructor. The constructor is a standard TypeScript feature and it is used to initialize the class when an instance is created. In Angular, it is used to inject dependencies, services, and other components, etc., and perform any necessary setup for the component. Key points called first when the component is instantiated, typically used for the dependency injection. No access to the component's DOM elements or the data bound properties like at the rate input. Not used in any lifecycle task, just object initialization. So this is an example. Here you can see that we have a data service. Okay, I'm just going to add this in our code, but here we don't have the data service, right? Just for explaining the things, just go with the code, and I'm going to go with control N with this and just change the. Okay, here you can see that. So here we have just import the data service, right? And here you can see that we have initialized the property, that is data has to be a string array. Constructor used to inject the data service. So here we are using the dependency injection, which is the use case of the constructor. That why we are using the constructor for the dependency injection. So here we have import the service, and here we are using the dependency injection to get the any function that we have, any API call we have. So we are going to access that one with the help of the this dot data service dot whatever function we have to define in our service. Okay, so this is what the constructor is. Okay, the constructor is used to inject the data service which we have checked. The constructor is not used for subscribing to the data or manipulating the DOM, but only for the setting up the dependency. Now we have the ng on init lifecycle hook. It's a lifecycle hook, right? The ng on init is a part of Angular's lifecycle hook and is called after the constructor. It is specially meant for the component initialization. So whenever I want like fetching the data from the API, I will use the ng on init lifecycle, particularly for the tasks that depend on the component's inputs and the data binding. ng on init is better placed for the things like fetching the data asynchronously, initializing the properties that depends on inputs, setting up the logic that needs the DOM to be ready. Key points about ngOnInit: called after the constructor, called once after the component's inputs are bound, so it has the access to the inputs at the rate input. Ideal for the initialization logic such as fetching data from the APIs, updating properties that depends on the inputs, etc. It has DOM access elements and bindings, which is constructor does not. On ng on init we have to import. Okay, then we have to use it with the implements on init, right? So here you can see that the constructor is basically used for the inject the data service, and ng on it is used to perform the initialization logic. So here we are going to just subscribe the data into ng on init. Okay, initialize data after ng on it is called. Okay, in this example, the ng on it lifecycle hook is used for fetching the data asynchronously after the component is initialized. It ensures that the component's inputs and the bindings are properly set before performing the task. Use cases: constructor use case, injection. When you need to inject services or the other dependencies into your component, you can use the constructor. Static setup: if there is any setup that does not rely on the DOM or the data bound properties, use constructor. For example, logging, initial assignments, or setting up the default values. ng on init use case: fetching the data. When you need to fetch the data asynchronously, like from the API after the component is being initialized. Data binding setup: if you need to perform an initialization that involves the data binding or interacting with the DOM elements, like manipulating the view based on the inputs, right? So this is just an example. Okay, examples with at the rate input. Sometimes you will use the ngOnInit lifecycle hook to handle at the rate input properties. This is useful when you need to perform logic based on the data passed to the component. In that case, you can use ngOnInit, okay, at the rate input. Constructor, best for the dependency injection and basic setup. Avoid any logic that depends on the component's inputs, views, or the DOM. ngOnInit idle for the initialization logic that requires component inputs to be set, including fetching the data asynchronously or initializing the properties after bindings are done. So this is a short answer, one way answer, that is constructor is used for the dependency injection and the basic setup. Don't use any kind of logic that depends on the component's inputs, view, or the DOM. And the ngOnInit basically for the initialization, right? We have the fetching the data. In that scenario, we can use ngOnInit or initializing any properties after the bindings are done. Okay, this is what about the constructor and the ngOnInit. Any doubt, any query in that, do let me in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching this video. Have a great day.